Okay, so this is Abnormal Site Group 6. My name is Matt, and I'll go ahead and get us started here. So what we essentially did was, we looked at different psychiatric disorders in this chapter and sort of did an assessment of one using a YouTube video that was 10 minutes or less. The one I happened to choose was post-traumatic stress disorder. I have a lot of personal experience with this, so it felt, pretty on par with something that I'd be interested in. In the video, treatment causes, symptoms, comorbidities, things like that. It was a pretty concise video in 5 minutes. It really gave a lot of insight to everything that was everything that's a part of it. And what's interesting is I think we have this association with PTSD that it's all military vets or only military vets, but really PTSD can arise from a lot of different things. You're looking at sexual trauma or abuse, a car accident, some major traumatic life event, or even some ongoing event. Studies have shown that in early childhood, consistent abuse can actually manifest itself in the form of PTSD later on. What we call triggers can happen. So these triggers are little moments that remind us of the incident or incidents. And then cause us to have sort of like a flashback memory to that moment, or like there's audio cues or visual cues or certain stimuli that just get us really overworked and sort of make us relive that moment. So that's sort of the complication there. One of the interventions of it is, of course, therapy, and within that therapy, we utilize what's called cognitive behavioral therapy, where we're really working through the tools that we have within ourselves to face what it is that we're afraid of, what's triggering us, what's the difficulty there, and then moving forward from that. It's a long process. It's not necessarily something that you get over overnight, but it's not necessarily something that um, that you have to live with for the rest of your life necessarily. What's interesting is it actually can manifest itself in a variety of ways. You're not necessarily having flashbacks all the time and this and that and the other. Again, very common understanding of it based on the generalities of what we know is that, oh, when you have PTSD, you're just having flashbacks and you're freaking out and all that. It can actually just have subtle effects. It can result in drinking heavily, overeating, undereating, issues with anger, things like that. So really, the subtle things that come with that are just as important as the larger issues at hand there. So, Alyssa, why don't you go ahead there?
Um, I'm sorry. So I start now with mine?
Yeah. So go ahead and start off, introduce yourself, and then talk about what you did, and then we'll go ahead and grab some conversation from there.
Okay. I'm Melissa. I chose OCD because I was interested in that specifically. I've seen it firsthand and I know a good amount about it, I think I'd say, where I know trauma has to do a lot with it. And I know just like maybe it could be something specific that happened in the past and the trauma with that causes someone to like really stick to their compulsions. And it's a motivating kind of just like it's this fear motivating disorder where if people feel like if it's like a number one and you have to avoid some numbers, they really think that if they don't avoid those numbers, then like something really bad would happen. I know a lot of people I've like read a lot about it where they think that like they'll die or that a loved one will die if they like don't go out of their way to avoid their compulsions. And I know that, and I've seen, like, I've got to understand it like firsthand, and I've seen people avoid. Like, I had a friend that has to avoid the numbers 3, 6, and 9, and I just seen her kind of just kind of put her whole life around having to avoid those numbers when it comes to like the TV or like like banging the doors 4 times or like checking everything because if you don't do it then you just think that something like someone's going to die or something bad's going to happen, and it like started because of this game in their childhood where they thought they wrote the number. There was like some weird thing where it was like you had to sell your soul to the devil, but it's not, it obviously wasn't like an actual thing. They just wrote the number 666 and then it scared them enough to want to avoid that number their whole life, or any number that can add up to it or is like divisible and multiple by it. So I know about OCD in that sense. The video I posted, that's the reason why I wanted to go on the topic of OCD, but the video I posted was a different kind of OCD, because I knew OCD where it had physical compulsions, but I didn't know there was compulsions, right? Sorry. I didn't know there was one where it could be mental and like it's just all about thoughts. So the YouTube video I posted or I shared was called Pure OCD, where it's about like if someone has violent thoughts a lot and that's what's kind of taken over. Sorry, there's a lot on it. And that's what's taken over their brain, and just like a bunch of violent thoughts of killing their loved ones or doing horrible things that they would never think of doing or they don't want to do, but it's just like those thoughts take over of like hurting someone. And then the video explained how they're obsessed over feeling guilt and like making themselves feel bad, and that's where their like their obsession comes from, and that's what's like motivating those thoughts. And they think that they're a bad person for thinking that, and they have a lot of shame they lived with. So it was an interesting form of OCD to like look at, because I didn't know people could have it where they're obsessed of making themselves feel bad, or they have this thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. And I watched that video, and there's a lot of crossover between that depression, even some elements of paranoid schizophrenia. And I think when we really break down OCD, we look at both the obsessive and the compulsion part. Like there's two elements to that, but one can definitely be more prominent because I'm definitely very OCD, and I'm more on the obsessive side of things. So like there has to be, I have to check my door several times before, leaving the house. And, I know that it's locked. I know cognitively that it's locked, but the obsessive compulsion is that I need to check it over and over and over. But what you're talking about, yeah, is largely based in, we can certainly look at childhood trauma, and there are some elements to PTSD there, and what you were talking about with your friend, the 3, the 6, and the 9. But there's a lot of overlap in this, that we see, which is really, really interesting, especially when we consider like OCD isn't necessarily always a bad thing. I mean, if you're I don't know, a tax attorney, or you work in something that's very detailed with numbers and things like that, then OCD is probably your best friend, because I mean you're double, triple checking those things. And really the downside to OCD is it can be very time consuming. You're doing things 6 times that only need to be done once. But
Yeah,
um,
I think it could be just like it could be a pretty big inconvenience, especially if it was something that is caused because of something that like small that happened in the past that just scared you so much that it makes you want to avoid that instance again, or like the numbers again, and then everything around, like you see numbers all the time if you're on like a YouTube video or a TV, like putting the volume up in your car or anything, like there's
right,
numbers everywhere. So just having to like constantly like avoid that, or it's like even numbers and the things you do, like rewinding the TV once or twice, and then you don't want to do that, so you have to keep doing it. And it's just like it's just in your everyday routine now, like everything you do, you just have to live your life around it, because you're just it's just like there's like this fear connected to it that if you don't do this, then something like the person thinks like some like it's just like if you don't do it, then you think that like the worst is gonna happen. So it really, that's like the big
right.
motivation, and having to keep doing those like little things that seem so silly, and it seems silly in the grand scheme of things, but yeah. But there's definitely a lot of different kinds of OCD I've seen, like where people are like with you always having to check the door. Is it because like you're paranoid someone can get in?
Um, that's a little bit of it. It really it stems from my dad did it, and I just sort of picked that behavior up. So it was a generational thing. My dad was very adamant about checking the door a million times, checking the stove, and it became a learned behavior. It was almost, I hate to water down this term, but it was almost Pavlovian, like a learned behavior. But there wasn't any positive stimulus. It was just a learned behavior by association in early childhood development. So it's interesting. Another one I do is I cross my toes, and I know that sounds weird, and it's not harmful at all. It's just like something I've been doing since I was a kid. And the obsessive part or the of that is that if I don't do it, I'll feel uncomfortable, like something's wrong, and that's what we call psychosomatic. It's nothing that's physically going to harm me if I don't do it, but internally it feels like something's wrong if I don't do it.
So, like with that, I wanted to ask because I do think, I guess, kind of similar, where I feel like I have to shut the doors 4 times or like kind of push on it 4 times. And I think
Uh,
that's just some weird obsession I have with order. So I didn't know if that was another thing that I wanted to look into it, but I didn't know if there's like something like that.
Yeah, it could be. I think all of us have those little ticks. I think one of the things we tend to do is we both overdiagnose and we overstate things. So, like, someone says, like, "Oh, because I do this, it means I have OCD." You could certainly have elements of that. I think everyone has the slightest bit of OCD at some point. Otherwise, you're just apathetic. Um, and I think we develop patterns, especially relevant to our experiences. Like you like things neat and tidy. You like things organized a certain way. That could be a preference. That could be OCD. I would venture to say it's more on the OCD side if it's something where if you didn't do it, it would cause you some sort of stress in your life or some sort of like, hey, I'm uncomfortable until this is done.
Yeah, I think.
So it's super interesting. It's a lot to consider because it's related to stress in our life. Um, I cannot remember the name of the chemical in our brain. I think it's the initials are CRF. Basically, it's associated with our pituitary gland and stress and everything, and it's actually seen a lot when we talk about love and the reaction of the brain to love and affection and all that. And then when that's activated, essentially we get stressed because something that we are clinging on to is taken away from us. So, like if you need to close the door 4 times and you only did it once, and that thought is racing through your mind that I need to do it 3 more times, that's essentially what's being activated.
Is there a way to fix that, or is it like related just to stress, or
It's certainly related to stress, and so what we do is called like a behavioral intervention. So you make little you make little adjustments in your life. So back in the day, I used to always have to sleep with the closet doors closed. I don't know why. It looked neater that way to me, and it bugged me if they were open. And so even by an inch, it would drive me nuts, and I couldn't sleep. And so my therapist suggested slowly open it up each night, just slowly, bit by bit by bit, and then get used to it and be present in your emotions and then talk yourself through it. Okay, if the closet door is open 1 inch and I'm feeling like I have to get up and close it, what happens if I don't? What if I just laid here? What if I introduce a new stimulus? Like I turn on the TV and then maybe I get on my phone and text someone and I introduce new distractions to keep my mind occupied away from the fact that the closet door is open. So you essentially just have to walk yourself through it slowly, and it takes time. It's not a race. It's definitely something that takes a good amount of time there.
so if we were to go by that though, so then if someone actually had like the negative thoughts connected to their compulsion, like I can't say the word compulsions or whatever, but they think they have to do it because something bad would happen. If
Uh-huh.
it was like they just didn't do it and then saw that nothing bad would happen, would that just fix it? Or what's the way to help?
I wish it was that simple. Yeah, unfortunately, we're talking about a pattern of behavior that's built pretty deep within our minds. So, one time is not going to change it, unfortunately. So, what we have to do is we have to keep what's called reinforcing an alternative behavior. So, like if I have to wash my hands 50 times a day, and someone says, "Look, you washed your hand once and nothing bad happened," um, that'd be cool. If that was the case, therapists would all be out of a job, but pretty quickly. But because it's something that's so deep within me, I can't just say, okay, I trust you on that. I need to have constant validation that yes, this is truth. Yes, this is truth. And I have to sort of build a new a new schema in my brain, a new response system in my brain. My neurotransmitters have to basically reform in a way that tells my mind, okay, I washed my hands once and it's okay. So it's definitely something that takes a little bit of time.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think we are good. So I will go ahead and stop this.